My next guest was an ordinary woman working in a shop when a stranger walked in and turned her life upside down. His name was Mark Acklom. He wooed Carolyn Woods with stories of wealth and success, but he was, in fact, one of Britain's most notorious conmen. He duped her out of £850,000 of savings before going on the run and sparking an international manhunt. Sky News' crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, spent 4 years tracking Mark Acklom, uncovering his vast criminal network and the people he managed to con out of thousands of pounds. Well, Carolyn has now written a book about what happened to her called Sleeping with a Psychopath, and she joins me now. Carolyn, thank you very much indeed for being with us this afternoon. It is an incredible story, and many wouldn't believe that this is a true story that you have written, but it is your story. Describe for me what first happened when you met Mark Acklom. At the time, you knew him as Mark Conway.
Yes, he introduced himself to me as Mark Conway. He turned up in my place of work. I was working in a lovely boutique in the town of Tetbury, where I had relatively recently moved, really trying to just have a bit of an adventure and a change of life, having gone through some fairly horrible but commonplace life events in the previous few years. So he walked in, he was very, very charismatic, very attractive, very amusing and entertaining. And I think even in the first few moments, I felt as though I had known him all my life. He felt like a friend. But of course, he was anything but.
He painted this picture of himself that was mysterious, was very exciting. You did, right from the word go, have a couple of question marks. You had a few doubts, but he managed to draw you in. He was very clever, very convincing. Your family, though, weren't as convinced, were they?
Well, my family initially, certainly my brother and sister-in-law expressed some doubts, but they hadn't met him. All they knew was that I had met a man that I found fascinating and probably described as, amazing. And they immediately sounded the warning bells, but unfortunately, I didn't heed them. I thought, how can you possibly judge somebody before you've met them? And I was probably a little bit upset at the thought that they obviously thought that nobody like this would show an interest in me. Then my daughters and some friends did meet him very briefly, and all found him odious. And actually, he was utterly diabolical. Even I found him odious on that occasion. And I find it very hard in retrospect to think how I continued that relationship. I made excuses for him, and they did express some doubts. But again, it's quite hard to be told by your children that you're doing the wrong thing. So, I take full responsibility for that. But I think
he was very controlling of you, Carolyn, though, wasn't he? And that behaviour started very early on when it came to finances, where it came to where you lived.
I think that's, I was going to go on to say, I think it's just so difficult to convey to people who haven't been in this situation just how you get hooked and reeled in. And I've had some communication from other women who've been in a similar situation, and they understand. And I think probably before it happened to me, I would have said, well, I would never get conned like that. But these characters, and Mark Acklom is particularly clever and cunning in this. They are so skilled at reading you, and they sort of set a scene that seems to satisfy your hopes and desires, and you do get reeled in. And he's done it not just with countless women, but with businessmen and women as well. So, I try to put out a warning, but whether it's heeded, I don't know. And whether anybody, if they were to meet him, would think, just don't do it, I don't know. So that is a very difficult sort of conundrum.
Mm. He'd told you he was a Swiss banker. He'd got various different business interests. He was also an MI6 spy. At what stage did things begin to unravel for you and you start to uncover who he really was?
Well, it wasn't really until well into, I'd been in the relationship for about a year, very miserable for most of it. I mean, it was very, very exciting for the first 2 or 3 months. and then he started to isolate me, and I became more and more depressed and introverted. It probably wasn't until another year when actually I hadn't seen him for a while. He, by that stage, had claimed to have a brain tumor and have had an operation on that, staging a very convincing little charade to make me believe that had happened. And that was one of a number of charades that he did stage to back up his claims. But I think it wasn't until then, and eventually when he failed to show up, when we hadn't seen each other for about 6 months and had arranged to meet in Nice, and he didn't show, and I just thought, nobody could do this. No one claiming to love someone could just leave them. And I was in a terrible state myself by that stage. I just thought, no, this is all wrong.
Because not only had you lost all of your life savings, you'd also lost a lot of yourself. This took a huge mental toll on you.
It did. I think the isolation was really terrible. And I mean, I was having panic attacks and nightmares. I felt complicit in my own downfall in retrospect once I found out who he was, because right at the beginning of the relationship, he had sort of sworn me to secrecy and said that it would take him 18 months to extricate himself from his contract with MI6. And he asked me to give him my word that I could be strong and stand by him, and I did that. And sadly, so the sort of character traits that I thought of as my strengths of loyalty and discretion and stoicism, all those things really contributed to my own downfall. Although not in the end, because in the end, after another very long battle with the help of Martin Brunt, as you've described, he was taken to court and he admitted only 5 of the 20 counts against him, and he is now in jail.
Yeah, and you mentioned Martin there because your story may well be familiar to Sky News viewers. It is one that our crime correspondent Martin Brunt followed closely over many years. This is Martin tracking Mark Acklom down. You worked closely with Martin to eventually see justice done.
Yes, I mean, Martin was instrumental in apprehending Mark Acklom. It was Martin who found him in prison in Spain, and these pictures that are on screen at the moment are of the court case that was going on in Spain, shortly thereafter. So, yes, Martin found him. He was the first person to discover where he was. But sadly, Acklom was released from prison in Spain before the arrest warrant here could be issued in his name. So the whole thing carried on for about another 3 years, I think.
A very, very long road to justice, and a traumatic one. But how are you now, Carolyn?
Well, I'm much better than I was. But, we are now 9 years on from my meeting with Mark Acklom. So it has taken just a very, very heavy toll. I mean, I was left suicidal, when I found out who he was and what he'd done to me, and the sense of betrayal and violation was really overwhelming and devastating. But I'm slowly sort of getting back to regaining some confidence. And as you said, I've written a book, which actually I didn't find at all cathartic, but as an intellectual exercise and something to focus on, I do feel a great sense of achievement in that. And if I can warn anybody and help anybody to avoid becoming a victim to somebody like Mark Acklom or Mark Acklom himself, that will have been worthwhile.
Carolyn, thank you very much indeed for telling us some of your story. It is fascinating, horrifying, terrifying in equal measure. Carolyn Woods there, thank you.
Thank you.